Hello, and welcome everyone to the webinar on Housing as a Key Stepping Stone to Financial Stability for People with Disabilities. Listening to the webinar. The audio for today's webinar is being broadcast through your computer. Please make sure your speakers are turned on or headphones are plugged in. You can control the audio broadcast via the Audio Broadcast panel. If you accidentally close the panel, you can reopen by going to the Communicate menu at the top of the screen and choosing Join Audio Broadcast. If you do not have sound capabilities on your computer or prefer to listen by phone, you can dial into 1-855-241-8681. The event number is 661-055-951. You do not need to enter an ID. Captioning. Real-time captioning is provided during this webinar. The captions can be found in the Media Viewer panel, which appears in the lower right corner of the webinar platform. If you want to make the Media Viewer panel larger, you can minimize other panels like Chat, Q&A, and/or Participants. Submitting questions. For Q&A, please use the chat box or Q&A box to send any questions you have during the webinar, and we will direct them accordingly during the Q&A portion. If you are listening by phone and not logged into the webinar, you may also ask questions by emailing them to me at amilioto@ndi-inc.org. Please note the webinar is being recorded and the materials will be placed on this webpage, nationaldisabilityinstitute.org/resources/empowerednyc-webinars. Technical assistance. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the chat box to send a message to me. Again, my email address is amilioto@ndi-inc.org. And with that, I will pass things along to Nancy Buteau.
Thanks so much, Al. Welcome, everybody. We're very happy that you're here with us today. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to just talk to you a little bit about our strategic partners. And those partners are the City of New York. Al, if we could go to the next slide, great. Empowered New York City, let me start there, is an initiative to create, test, and promote new strategies to enable New Yorkers with disabilities to improve their financial stability. This initiative is advancing financial capability by offering tailored one-on-one financial counseling for people with disabilities, enhanced with new expertise, outreach, and tools. And by providing this monthly webinar training series for service providers like you to be able to gain that knowledge and know what we're doing. So some of our strategic partners include the City of New York, led by the New York City Department of Consumer Affairs, Office of Financial Empowerment, as well as the New York City Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities. Some of our other strategic partners include ourselves, National Disability Institute, City Community Development, COSIS Family Foundation, and a wonderful advisory board of municipal offices, disability service providers, and financial empowerment service providers. For those of you who have been following these webinars from the beginning, we used to have all of those partners introduce ourselves. What we do now is, for anybody who received the PowerPoint, or if you would like to go onto our website and download the PowerPoint, you will get more slides about all of our partners attached to the end of this presentation. So I hope you're all doing this. Empowered New York City, we are open. We have worked with, I believe, over, I want to say 170, over 170 individuals so far. So please refer the folks that you're working with to one of our financial counselors. Remember, they specialize in one-on-one financial counseling. The services are always free and they are confidential. The counselors can help a person access their credit report, their score. And the counselors have been trained, so they have a deeper knowledge of disability benefits, which is really important for people when they're going to financial counseling, that the counselors are also knowledgeable in disability. And the sessions are available in most boroughs now. If you want more information or if you would like to make an appointment, you can go to nyc.gov/empowered-NYC. And we have two great speakers with us today, and the objectives that we're going to be looking at are understanding the laws that protect individuals with disabilities living in public housing, learn how to request accommodations, recognize disability-specific housing programs, know how rent is calculated, learn about education assistance, and understand the earned income disregard. So with that, I would like to turn it over to our first speaker, Arthur Jacobs. Arthur is the housing coordinator at the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities, one of our partners. And we're very happy to have him here today. And having said that, Arthur, I will now turn it over to you.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you all for coming. Just trying to find how to forward the slides.
So if you hover over to the left, you should see a place. And if not, Al, you can come on and just tell us how to do that. Sorry. Bear with us one second, folks.
Okay, I found it.
Great.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the basics of accessing housing, so the basics of accessible housing and disability-specific housing subsidies in New York City. So an overview of the law. To start with, there are several laws and codes and regulations that govern housing in New York City. The first is the Fair Housing Act of 1968. Also, there's Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. There's the New York City Human Rights Law, as well as the New York City Building Code. All right, so the Fair Housing Act of 1968, it applies to buildings that have 4 units or more that were built for first occupancy after March 13th of 1991. The general requirements are that public and common use areas are readily accessible and usable. In elevator buildings, all of the apartments need to be reachable by a person with a disability. And in non-elevator buildings, all of the ground floor apartments need to be reachable. All doors throughout the building should be wide enough to allow passage by a person with a disability. And then at the apartment-specific level, you have the requirement that there be an accessible route both into and through the individual unit. Light switches, electrical outlets, thermostats, and other controls are in an accessible location, and that reinforcements in bathroom walls are in place to allow for the later installation of grab bars. Also that kitchens and bathrooms are built with maneuverability and usability in mind. So there are turning radiuses and wide enough spaces for somebody to actually get into and maneuver throughout the space. Section 504 of the Rehab Act is applicable to buildings that were designed after July 11th of 1988 and that receive federal funds for the design or construction of the development. The mandate, the specifics of this are that it provides for disability-specific set-asides, 5% mobility and 2% hearing vision. These set-aside units have pre-built accessibility features, such as for mobility units, grab bars, shower seats, and removable base cabinets, or base cabinets that have been removed, rather. And for hearing vision, it's flashing doorbells and fire alarms, controls in the front of the appliance for ease of access, and that sort of thing. So there's wiring that has been done that allows for those disability-specific controls. All right, so the New York City Human Rights Law. This is one of the strongest, most robust human rights laws in the country and provides the most protections, really, of all of the things that govern disability rights in the city. It places the financial burden of accommodations on the landlord, which is a change from the Fair Housing Act, and the owner has the burden of proving undue hardship. It's enforced by the City Commission on Human Rights, and we'll get a little bit more into that when we talk about reasonable accommodations. So the New York City Building Code, the first thing that really went into place that mandated accessibility was Local Law 58 of 1987. So it mandated that there were similar provisions to what came later in the Fair Housing Act in 91. So it mandated adaptability requirements and usability requirements within the buildings. It applies to buildings that were built or significantly renovated after September 1st of 1987. And then the 2008 and 2014 building codes are really the most robust building codes that apply to accessibility, and they mandate what's known as adaptability standards, which are these these standards that the unit have certain things in place so that they're readily adaptable for a person with a disability if they request, like grab bars in the bathroom. So there's reinforcements already in the walls, so it's just easy to install those grab bars, or cabinets that when you remove them, the wall behind it is already painted, so that you really just have to remove the cabinet. It's not a big burden on the landlord. So where can you find accessible housing? There are three main areas: market rate apartments, affordable housing lotteries, and HUD subsidized buildings. So in market rate apartments, again, buildings built after September of '87 should have basic accessibility. I say should with a big caveat there, because that early in the kind of accessibility movement, there weren't a lot of standards in place and a lot of guidance in place on what accessibility looked like. So people didn't necessarily know how to do it. These guidelines began to be widely distributed in the mid-90s. So about 94, 95, that's when you start to see more robust accessibility. And it just kind of gets better as the buildings get newer and as the standards and codes get updated. So the basic thing to think about is the newer the building, the more likely it is to be accessible. And then Section 504 set-asides apply to the entire building, including market rate units. So a lot of times you'll see those in the housing lottery, the affordable housing lottery buildings. So it's not just the affordable housing units that have to have those 5% set-asides. and 2% set-asides, but it's the entire development that has to have them. All right, so affordable housing lotteries. To apply in the city for the affordable housing lotteries, you can go to Housing Connect, which you see the URL here, nyc.gov/Housing Connect. That's the biggest provider of set-asides, and you would indicate, as you're putting your profile together, you would indicate that you have a disability in the household members section of the profile. So you would indicate, mobility or hearing, vision, disability. And the set-aside requirements are minimums. There are some developments that provide more than 5 and 2%. And HUD subsidized buildings, these are also known as project-based Section 8 buildings. There are several providers. I'm not going to list out the URLs. You'll see them on the slides here. But basically, you've got HUD, which provides a list on their website. HPD also has a list for developments that they work with. And then there are city and state Mitchell-Lama buildings that also have Section 8 and what's known as Section 236 rentals as well. You think of Mitchell-Lama as co-ops, or you're owning it, but they also have rentals and they do have Section 8 and the precursor to Section 8, which is Section 236. All right, so let's get into requesting accommodations. Reasonable accommodations, what that means when you break it down to the essentials is the removal of a barrier or the change of a policy. It's best done in writing, so that could be an email or an actual letter. That doesn't matter so much as long as it's in writing. And the reasonable accommodation request process is a cooperative process between the tenant and the landlord. It's meant to be kind of a negotiation to figure out what's going to work best for the tenant and what's affordable for the landlord. The City Commission on Human Rights can help with this process. So if you make a request to your landlord and they blow you off or don't respond or just plain out say no, you can always go to CCHR and request assistance with that kind of mediation process. And again, the burden for proving undue hardship is on the landlord, and it's typically a pretty high bar. So the commission, if the landlord says, well, we just can't afford this, it's an undue burden, the commission's going to say prove it, and they're going to, it's going to be typically is a tough thing to do. All right, so let's move into the disability-specific subsidy programs. There are several in the city: supportive housing, the nursing home transition and diversion program, individual supports and services and self-direction through OPWDD, HASA, HIV and AIDS Services Administration, and the Disability Rent Increase Exemption. And then there are also 2 shared housing programs, home sharing and family-type homes for adults. Supportive housing. Supportive housing is really geared more towards people with mental illness and substance use disorders. There are some supportive housing units available for individuals who have intellectual or developmental disabilities, but the majority really go towards mental illness and substance use. Supportive housing is kind of, in the city, it's ran through HRA. You have to do what's known as a 2010E to apply for supportive housing. And for those who don't know, supportive housing is just that. It's housing with supports. So not only do you get the subsidy for the housing, but you also get additional supports to help you live independently within that housing. The nursing home transition and diversion program is for people who have what they refer to as nursing home level care needs, physical disabilities and but not traumatic brain injury. There's a separate program for traumatic brain injury. The NHTD program has a housing voucher attached to it, which is why I have it listed here. I didn't list TBI waiver because it does not have a housing voucher associated with it any longer. but it also provides not only the housing subsidy, but it also does provide support services like home care or meals, like Meals on Wheels, that sort of thing, nursing, visiting nursing services, that sort of thing. ISS and self-direction is through OPWDD. It's specifically for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. They have a whole system of supports that they provide, and the housing subsidy is one of those. HIV/AIDS Services Administration, obviously you would have to have HIV or AIDS. And they also have, a lot of these actually, it seems, are very much in line with the kind of supportive housing model. So they also have services designed for, healthcare and that sort of thing, as well as housing. And then the last one isn't an actual subsidy like the others. It's the Disability Rent Increase Exemption. And this provides a rent freeze on rent-regulated apartment units where the tenant is disabled. You can't have a voucher or live in NYCHA to participate, and you have to have a disability benefit that you receive. So, for instance, SSI or SSDI or a disability pension from the VA or something like that. That's the way that they prove disability in that program. And just to kind of explain, because I get this question all the time, why, if you have a voucher or live in NYCHA, would you not apply? One of the requirements for the rent freeze program is that you spend more than 1/3 of your income, your monthly income, on rent. And in those voucher programs and public housing programs, you're not allowed to pay more than 30% of your income towards rent and utilities. So you automatically just don't qualify because you're not spending more than 30% of your monthly income on rent. So the home sharing, shared housing programs. Home sharing is run by the New York Foundation for Senior Citizens. This program is basically like a roommate matching service. I probably get in trouble for this, but I like to call it eHarmony for roommates. They have a whole set of questions that they ask each person who is interested in finding a roommate in order to try to best match people up. One of the roommates has to be a senior, either the person trying to find an apartment or the person who is trying to find a roommate. And that's it. The Family Type Homes for Adults, this is a state program. In the city, it's administered by HRA, but it's a provider that uses their private home, so it's a certified provider that uses their own home to provide the services. They provide you with a furnished room, meals, laundry services, and some personal care services. A lot of times this is a program for people who only have SSI and have other needs as well. All right, so that's it from me. This is my contact and some additional resources, and I will now turn it over to Nancy.
Thank you so much, Arthur. That was really great information. I appreciate it. For those of you on the line, remember that if you have any questions for Arthur or our upcoming speaker, you can put them in Q&A, and we will try to get them to our speakers. So again, Arthur, thank you very much. I am now very happy to introduce our next speaker, Lisa Clavery. She is a management trainer in the Human Resources Department at the New York City Housing Authority, and she is going to talk to us about some exclusions and calculations specific for NYCHA residents. So, Lisa, I'll now turn it over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, so I'm just going to give you an overview of NYCHA policies, which is massive, right? So with New York City Housing Authority, of course, we have to be in compliance with Department of Housing and Urban Development. So as that agency, that federal agency, makes changes, we, of course, are mandated to move along with the changes that they make. So I'm just going to give an overview of what we've put in place to try to help residents navigate what happens within NYCHA. So the first thing I think is really important and it's exciting for us is that the Housing Authority has gone digital. So we're trying to make it easier for people to complete their annual income recertifications by going online. So they can use any personal electronic device that they have, their home computer, their smartphone, their laptop, anything that they have, and they can go on to our website and register and complete these processes instead of having to come into the management office. We also have some kiosks in the lobbies of management offices where they can do that if they don't own a computer. If they're having difficulty or, computer literacy is, kind of sketchy for people, they need additional assistance. There are housing assistants in the management office that they can go and get assistance in completing their annual income, okay, and rather providing that information. But I think it's good if they try to schedule an appointment because there's usually a lot of things that are going on in management offices, so we want to make sure that they can get the assistance that they need. If they go online to use the My NYCHA app, they can also set up a free email account, so they can be done simultaneously while they're using the application. As I said, every year the income is verified, and this is in accordance with their lease agreement. So I know when we give out the lease, it is a huge document. It's 13 pages, and sometimes people don't read everything. But we would like to encourage people to be a little more proactive and to know when they sign the lease, it's actually a contract. It's a contract between the tenant and the Housing Authority. So it provides information about what the tenant is responsible to do and what the Housing Authority is responsible to provide for them. So we're trying to encourage people to complete these processes digitally, but if people have opted out, they will still receive a hard copy of the form, and they can fill that out and send it back to the management office or walk it in, or there's an address, I believe it goes to Long Island City for it to be scanned into our systems. So right now it is an option. I don't know how much longer the option is going to last, but currently this is something that's available for people. So a month before the annual is due, notification is sent to the residents to let them know that the self-service portal is available so that they can go online and they can complete the process, or they will receive the hard copy to be completed, right? So at the time that we review their income, we're also looking at the composition of the household, who's living there. And when we talk about who's living there, we're talking about people who are authorized to live there. So we have a large number of unauthorized residents. We're trying to discourage that because it makes it difficult to provide services for people or affect what happens if a tenant moves out of an apartment and then he leaves someone in the apartment that is not authorized to live there. So we want to be able to move forward with our waiting list, and if a registered tenant moves out of the apartment, we want to make sure that that apartment is vacant so we can go to our waiting list and give another family the same opportunity that was given to this family that is moving out. Okay. We also can correct information in between the annual income recertification period. So this is what's known as an interim. So interim is anything that changes to the household composition or their income. So they can go online, they can let us know what's happening, or they can, again, come into the office and speak to a housing assistant. So the rent calculation is based on a number of options depending on what's happening in your household. So to piggyback on what Arthur stated, In subsidized housing, we're looking at it being income-based. It means that it's 30% of the family's adjusted income, and that's for rent and utilities. In most NYCHA developments, the utilities are included in the rent. They may pay additional fees for electricity usage as it relates to air conditioners or freezers or water usage if there's a dishwasher. There are some developments that do have those capabilities, okay, but that's addition to the rent, okay? Then we also have what's known as a flat rent, which is a maximum amount of rent that can be charged for an apartment, but it's based on the apartment size, okay? A public assistance shelter amount, which is based on the number of people on the budget, and a minimum rent, which is $0 within public housing, or $50 if it's a Section 8 apartment. And we have some developments that are known as mixed finance developments, which have conventional tenants and also Section 8 participants. These are some of the income sources that we include in the projection of rent. So when we're looking at calculating a household income, we're looking at all sources from everyone in the household, and we're looking at gross income, okay? Then we apply some deductions based on our guidelines, which I'll go through in the next slide, and then determine a net adjusted income, and then we take 30% of that. So we're looking at earned income. So somebody's employed. Sometimes people have one full-time job. Somebody might have a couple of part-time jobs, so we would add those things together. Own business income, people who are self-employed or maybe independent contractors. They work for different companies based on their discipline. For instance, computer programmers. They may work for different entities and they receive 1099s instead of W-2s. We would look at all the income that they earn for a given year. SSI, and I'm sorry I left out Social Security, but that is included as well, okay? Public assistance, unemployment benefits, workers' compensation, disability payments, pension payments, annuities, which of course are another source of retirement benefits. We look at income from assets, such as interest on savings. So sometimes when tenants see that we're asking about savings accounts that they have or any pension accounts, they normally think that we're projecting the full value of that asset, and we are not. We are only looking at the interest that is earned on that asset. So usually that with the interest rates that are currently occurring, there's usually a very small amount, okay? But we are dependent on the tenants to actually disclose that information to us. We also project alimony and child support, regular and special pay of a member of the armed services, lottery winnings that are paid off on a periodic basis. We do not project lump sums. So if someone hit the mega and they took it as a lump sum, we couldn't project it. But if they took it over yearly installments, we could project it if they decided to continue living within public housing. We also look at recurring monetary contributions that are received from non-household members. So we have some residents who are not currently employed, and they might have family members that are assisting them through difficult times and giving them monthly contributions. It could be former relationships. If that's what they're using to sustain their household, we will also project that. And we also look at the housing allowance received under Chapter 31 of the post-9/11 GI Bill. So this is housing allotments that are given to veterans to help supplement their income towards rent. Okay, so once we look at the gross, and then we will project it for the year, then we look at the family composition, and we determine, based on that composition, what expenses a household may qualify for. So one of them is the minor deduction, which is $480 per dependent. So if there are minor children in a household, we will give that $480 for each dependent that's in the household. Child care costs. Now, these costs have to reflect reasonable costs, and they cannot exceed the amount of employment income submitted by the resident. I must add on to that child care expense that it cannot exceed the lowest gross income amount of the person in the household. So I'm your tenant. I work for Housing Authority. I make $50,000 a year. My adult daughter is working part-time. She's making $6,000 a year when she's in college. But I also have a minor child that's under the age of 13 that I pay child care expenses for. I spend $10,000 for the year for child care expenses, but I would only be able to get the deduction for the lowest income amount in the household, which would be my daughter who's working part-time, okay? Disability expenses and medical expenses are calculated the same way. We're looking at persons who have to pay out of pocket and they're not reimbursed for those monies that they pay for, maybe apparatus. It could be rollators if they're renting them, or scooter chairs. Sometimes it's medical appliances, beds, so on and so forth. And medical expenses. Medical expenses could be for physician's visits, prescriptions, dental, anything that's allowable under IRS guidelines, we will attribute to the household, but it has to be in excess of 3% of the family gross income. Okay, can't be the full amount. We also give a $400 deduction for any household that is deemed as elderly or disabled, and that deduction is $400 one time for the household, not per member. So you could have a tenant and a co-tenant, and they're both elderly, which is over the age of 62, but they would only get one $400 deduction, okay? And we also look at Medicare versus Medicaid. Medicare is seen as a medical expense, okay, because it is deducted from the recipient's entitlement, so we would be able to count that towards medical expenses and it's not reimbursed. Medicaid, it doesn't fall in the same category, so we can't count that as a medical expense. All right, so now that we know a little bit about the expenses, let's look at some income that we don't project. So we looked at what we include. There are certain types of income that we don't project for a household unless it is the only source of income within that household. And if the excluded income is the only source, then the rent will be the minimum amount of $0. So we're looking at income that's received by or for children. And this is the earned income of children under the age of 18, which includes foster children, but not the head of household or spouse. So if we have an emancipated minor that is under the age of 18, but they are the head of household, we would not exclude their income. We exclude also foster care payments, adoption assistance payments, and kinship guardian assistance payments, which are payments that are given to a household where they have taken on the responsibility of their relatives who may have been in the foster care system. We also exclude temporary and sporadic income or medical reimbursements. So we're talking about casual or sporadic income. So someone has a job, it's maybe a weekend, a month, it's not consistent, so we wouldn't project that. Somebody is an aspiring photographer, but they don't do it on a regular basis. That's not something that we would project. We really are looking at recurring income that's coming into the household. Temporary employment, which doesn't last longer than 180 days and does not result in permanent employment. So we might have someone that's employed temporarily, and we could exclude that. But if it leads to full-time employment, then we would start to look at those recurring payments at a later time. Lump sum additions to assets. So if someone inherited money or property that has a value, insurance payments, any capital gains, and this is tax season, those tax rebates are going to start coming in, we don't project that as income, okay? Hazardous duty pay to a member of the armed services who's away from home and exposed to hostile fire. They receive additional monies in conjunction with their regular or special pay, which we do include, but for the hazardous duty pay, we exclude it. We also exclude a serviceman's lump sum death benefit and their mustering out pay. So if they die in the line of duty, that money that's paid to the family is not projected. And mustering out pay just means that they're leaving military service and they're getting paid for the days or vacation days, personal time that they didn't use while they were in active duty. A temporary residence income. We don't project that because they have not been given permission to reside permanently within the household. So temporary residence income may be represented by a home attendant or even a family member who's staying for a short amount of time. The maximum amount of time that a temporary resident can stay in an authorized household is a year, okay? We also exclude payments that are in reimbursement of medical expenses. So if someone paid out of pocket and they were reimbursed by Medicare Part D program or another program that tried to make them whole for their out-of-pocket expense, we would then not claim that as income and project it for the household. Disabled or elderly assistance. So the same way that we have foster care payments for children, we also have programs that offer foster payments for the care of adults and persons that cannot live on their own. There are programs that are also sponsored by the state home care payments, and Plan for Achieving Self-Support, which is from the Department of Human Services, so they deal with Social Security. They're trying to help people be self-sufficient that may have a disability. Title V employment, which are salaries that are funded under the Older Americans Act of 1965, and a live-in aids income. So if someone needs to have a home attendant that's living in the household, we would not project their income, because if we do that, then we are giving them permission to reside in the apartment and making them part of the household. If an elderly or disabled person receives any grants or distributions for the use of an apparatus or expenses for attendant care, or any types of contributions that are specifically for medical expenses, we would not project that as income. Education assistance. For full-time students that are also working full-time, any income that's in excess of $480, we do not project unless they are the head of household or spouse. So if someone is part of the family composition and they're a full-time student and they're also working full-time, we don't project their income, so it's advantageous for them and it helps out the household as well. Title IV scholarships, veterans benefits, student assistance, these are all things that are to be paid to the institution of learning. Therefore, books, transportation, stipends, lab fees, that's for those purposes only. We don't project it as income. For the tenant service stipends, that relates to training programs that tenants may participate in where they receive a stipend for their transportation fees, and it's usually a small amount of money. So if it's $200 or less, we exclude it, okay? If it's more than $200, we will project the whole amount, And if there's any other training programs or training grants that a household member may be eligible for, we would also exclude those monies that they receive. Miscellaneous exemptions include the value of food stamps because there is no cash value of food stamps. So for that particular household, if that's the only source of income that they have, then they would also be considered to have zero income, and we would again project their rent as zero. Other exemptions also include Holocaust and Native American reparations and Agent Orange payments. So now we'll deal with the elephant in the room, which is the earned income disregard, or you also might hear the term earned income disallowance, right? Now, this program is part of the Quality Housing and Work Responsibility Act of 1998, and this means that it is a congressional law. So if it is not being followed, that means developments are breaking the law. And there are certain qualifiers that tenants have to meet in order to be eligible for this, right? So this earned income disregard encourages resident economic self-sufficiency by rewarding qualified adult residents with an income disregard when a transition is made from employment, from unemployment, from welfare to work, or when additional income is earned during participation in an economic self-sufficiency or job training program. Let me add into this that the other qualifiers is that the person has to be 18 years of age or older. They have to be a U.S. citizen or a non-citizen with eligible status. They have to be first-time recipients of this earned income disregard or disallowance. They can only get it if they're Section 8 participants, if they are also disabled. And I think they have to be an authorized occupant of the apartment. So if they're unauthorized, we can't offer this to them, okay? So if we're looking at someone that's moving from unemployment to employment, we're looking for someone that's entering the job market for the first time. So it could be high school graduate, could be a college graduate. We're also looking at someone who's been unemployed for 12 months or more, perhaps receiving unemployment benefits, or a very low income, meaning that they were working for minimum wage, no more than 10 hours a week for 50 weeks of the year. So if we were looking at the minimum wage of $15, that means that they couldn't earn any more than $7,500 in order to qualify under this particular unemployment to employment model. We're also looking at, again, moving from welfare to work, or if they receive temporary assistance for needy families for 6 months or more. And if they participated in an economic self-sufficiency or job training program, which could consist of employment counseling, work placement, apprenticeship programs, and also programs that ready participants for work dealing with substance abuse or mental health programs. So the disallowance functions as a temporary income exclusion for 2 12-month periods. So the EID clock begins on the first of the month following the date the qualifying family member is employed or first experiences an increase in earnings due to employment. For example, I'm the tenant, I was unemployed. I was unemployed for over a year. Now, I just became employed today, April 9th. I go into the management office and I let them know that I'm employed now. My exclusion clock would start the first of the month after today, which would be May the 1st. This date is important because this is when interim rent changes have to be calculated in order to add the income, add my income into a projection on almost like a phase-in basis, right? So it's to encourage my continued employment, but it's also to help me transition from being unemployed and managing my funds a little better, okay? So for the first 12 months, 100% of the new income from employment is excluded. So if we're starting from May the 1st of 2019, that means that from May the 1st of 2019 through May the 1st of 2020, 100% of the new income from employment will be excluded. Okay? Then starting May 1st of 2020 through May 1st of 2021, you will use 50% of the new income. And then finally, when the interim rent change is done in 2021, all of the income will be used, and that will be projected for the household. Now, this period, this exclusion period is a maximum of 24 months, and so effective May 2016, any person who meets the qualifiers that I discussed is limited to one 24-month disregard period during his or her lifetime, and it's for each family member. So a household could have potentially more than one person who is eligible for this income exclusion. So it's not limited to one person per household. They just have to meet the qualifiers, and then they would be eligible for it, okay? The disregard cumulative period is suspended if the resident is laid off or stops work for some other reason. And if an EID person moves out of public housing and then returns, the original 24-month maximum period is still in effect, okay? And so with that, I will turn the floor back over to Nancy.
And we do have a few minutes, so I'm going to go through a few more slides, and then we will get to some questions and answers. We do have some questions that have come in through the Q&A. But first, some action items. So I think the My NYCHA app is a very convenient way to be able to get information, and as Lisa said, it was free. So I encourage people to download the My NYCHA app and to let the folks know that you're working with that this is an app that they can use. Also, please go to our website, nationaldisabilityinstitute.org, resources, webinars, Empowered NYC webinars, and you are going to find the following resources. One is the New York City Housing Assistance for People with Disabilities, and then the other is Access Housing, Your Guide to Accessible Housing in New York City. Those have been provided by Arthur from the Mayor's Office on Persons with Disabilities, and will provide even more information than what you received today. Also, please remember that counseling is free and confidential, and it's available. So if you want to refer anybody, or if you yourself would like to make an appointment with a financial counselor who's also been trained in benefits, please go to nyc.gov/empowerednyc. And some resources that we have for you that I think some of them were also in the presentation. So the HUD subsidized building apartment search that actually kind of touches base on one of the questions that we had about, do you have a list of housing locations for this population of individuals? So that's one place you can go for that information. Also, Housing Preservation and Development Project-based vouchers. And then lastly, the New York City Housing Authority Section 8 website. So those are all good resources for all of you to be able to research. And as usual, if you have any questions, please contact myself, Nancy Buteau, Wanda Lopez, Crystal Rivera, or Abby Meyerhoff. We are all here to assist you in any way possible. And with that, we've got a few minutes, so I would like to try to get in a couple questions. The first one, Arthur, I think it might be for you because it's about the home sharing program. And the person said, from what I understand, it's possible that a senior can be matched with a homeowner who is not a senior. Is that a requirement? I'm sorry, is there a requirement for the number of bedrooms needed to qualify as a home sharing home?
Okay, so the way that requirement is that one of the people has to be a senior, whether it's the homeowner or the roommate, doesn't matter, but one of them has to be a senior. And then as far as number of bedrooms, if you have a home that you'd like to participate in the program, basically you just need to have an extra bedroom. Or multiple extra bedrooms. So each roommate that you would have would need their own bedroom, essentially. So like you couldn't use the living room of a one bedroom, for instance, in that program. That wouldn't qualify. You'd have to have a separate bedroom.
Great. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also have another question. This could be for either of you. Lisa, maybe if you want to answer first, and then we'll give Arthur a chance. It's kind of a tough question, but how hard would it be for an out-of-stater with disabilities to move into New York City housing?
Oh, well, the issue that I think we're being confronted with now is that there is a long waiting list. So it is difficult. That's why it is good to have different resources and for people not to just think about New York City Housing Authority as the only option. There's HPD, there's Housing Connect, there's a lot of different programs that are available. I think people just have to exercise everything. Now, if they are Section 8 participants, they may be able to relocate to New York City through the portability program, but that requires that Section 8 voucher holder the responsibility of searching out the landlord in New York that's willing to accept Section 8, and then the process would be finished on whatever city that they're moving from.
Great, thank you. Arthur, anything else to add to that?
A couple things, and Lisa actually can probably, because I have kind of a question, but they mentioned in their question about a person with a disability, and it's important to note that in public housing, for initial applications, there is no preference for a person with a disability. HUD views that as discriminatory, actually, to put a preference. It's different if you're already a resident and you're requesting some kind of reasonable accommodation or a move like that, but as a new resident, there is no preference.
That's true.
And Lisa, is there a preference, is there a residency preference? So people who apply from New York City get preference over people who apply from outside of the city? That I don't know about.
No, I don't think so. I think it's really based on your what your need is, the priority that you're assigned. So more often than not, for people who are waiting for housing or residents that are waiting for New York City Housing Authority, and so there's quite a long waiting list because the Housing Authority has changed from what it initially was proposed, right? So you were living in housing, you were supposed to live there for a finite amount of time, and when you got on your feet, you were doing a little better, you were supposed to move out. But of course, what we have seen is that people have stayed for generations, so the availability, or rather the turnover, is not as quick as I think a lot of people would like to see.
Great. Thank you both very much. I appreciate that. We do have a couple other questions. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to them because of time. I want to get to our last slide. However, I do want to let the attendees know that I will be getting these questions to our presenters, and we will make sure that we get an answer back to you. So thank you very much for your questions. And lastly, please join us for our next training, which is going to be Work Incentives in Action. And that'll be on Tuesday, May 14th, 2019, from 1 to 2 p.m. And the registration link is on your screen right now. I want to again thank very much Arthur and Lisa. What great information from both of you. Thank you so much for your time and for all of the great information. And to everyone, have a great rest of your Tuesday. Thank you.